All right, so welcome to our first live stream for the iOS class as part of the live stream on Electronic Armory. I'm doing both Android and iOS. I'm going to do these back to back pretty much with a little bit of prep time in between. So if you're looking for the Android live stream, that already happened and you can watch the video. Those usually take about an hour or two to get processed, and then those will go live on the site. So just check out the channel if you're looking for the Android one. And as I mentioned, this one is the iOS live stream. And so we're going to do, instead of starting from scratch, you can watch my previous videos on iOS development in Swift. If you are starting from scratch, we're going to pick up where I left off my last video, which was locations, core location, and geofencing. And so we're going to go through that briefly just to remind you guys what we talked about, and then we're going to add in, as today's live stream, a notification when you enter and exit that geofence. So for example, if you're coming home, you can have your iPhone say, okay, I realize that you're home, let me pop up this notification and this reminder because today is Friday to take out the trash. Something like that. So again, this will be entering a geofence of some sort, and then we'll pop up a notification there. This is only going to be about a half hour, so I already have some code prepared, and we're going to just dump it into the application, and then we're going to explain it to you so you understand each line of code. And then I will post this code up on the Electronic Armory GitHub account, and you can have access to all of this code. I will post that in the video's live stream description below. And of course, if you have any questions as you're watching this live stream, type them into the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that and make sure that I answer your questions. And certainly if you have questions or ideas for the next live stream, let me know and cover what you guys want covered. If you're working on a particular application, let's talk about how we can get you through that. Maybe there's some technology you're not familiar with. If I can help, I will. If I'm not familiar with it, then I won't be able to help you in that case. But let's get started in the review of this application. So again, this is from a previous video that's recorded, but we built this application out, and it's going to use the device's location to enter and exit a region. And once that region gets entered or exited upon, we have these two functions that get called. And so when you're entering a region, I'm just printing out to the debug console that you've entered that region. And likewise, when you're exiting that region, it is going to print out this line of code. So let me run this really quickly just to show you how this works. Bring up our simulator. It's got to boot up. And while that's booting up, let me show you how we're going to change the location of our simulator or our device's location. So up in the debug menu, under location, we can give it all these different locations. Now, custom location is you're physically typing in the GPS location. Okay, so there's a GPS location that I just grabbed off of a website. If you want to simulate a human being with an iPhone in their pocket, let's say, you would choose city run, and this would go about 3, 4, 5 miles an hour, and it just goes and starts reporting GPS locations as the phones. And then there is Apple Campus, and that will give you just a singular GPS. Okay, so this application doesn't do anything, as you can see, in terms of UI. But let's keep an eye on our debug window on the bottom right-hand side. So again, debug location. Our location is going to be set up. Let me scroll up so you can see. Our location is going to be our geofence, I should say. Our geofence region is going to be centered at these coordinates. So 43.6. Right now we're outside at 33.61. Longitude -116. We're keeping that exactly the same. And then our radius is going to be 100 meters with the identifier of Boise. And so if you're creating an app Let's say, again, you go home, you say, I want to take out the trash. You give that identifier a name, something unique, so you know that that's that particular geofence. You can set up many geofences. If you are some kind of chain, whether it's a restaurant or some kind of store, and somebody is walking past your store, you can give it the store ID number. Let's say restaurant 123. And based on that ID number, you can then go look up maybe something specific about that particular restaurant. Okay, so you can use this saying that you've entered, and in our case, it's the city of Boise. All right, so right now we are outside of that geofence. So let's go ahead and go inside of the geofence by selecting the GPS that falls within that. Hit OK, and again, we entered in that region. So we get that code executed. Again, this is this line of code here. Go back to debug location, custom location, and change that to something else outside of our GPS geofence, and you can see that we've exited it. Okay, so that doesn't really help us because nothing is happening that the user can identify. So what we want to do is we want to add in local notifications. Now, push notifications, as you may be familiar, come from an external server. Now, this is something like Pinterest will send you, hey, we think you'd be interested in these pins based on data it knows about you and what you've been looking at, etc. Instagram will say, hey, somebody just messaged you or liked your photo. And so again, that's coming from the server and it's going to your phone. That's a push notification. With local notification, these originate from the phone itself. And so that's what we want to do is when I enter a region, I want to pop up a local notification and say, hey, remember to take out the trash. And I can have that fired immediately, or I can have it fired in 15 minutes, which is probably a better idea because maybe I'm driving into my driveway, I set up my geolocation around my house, that's maybe 10 meters or so, and I just pulled up. Well, I don't want that thing firing immediately. Maybe give me a minute or two to shut off the car, put it in the park, whatever, not in that order, but do some things and then get out of the car. And as soon as I get out of the car, maybe you can see that the device is moving and then boom, pop up that notification. Hey, don't forget to take out the trash. Now I'm outside my car. Maybe the trash cans are right there. I pull them to the end of the driveway and success. So again, think about how your users are going to be using your application. You can even test it yourself. You can pull into your driveway, do some things in your car, shut it off, etc. Get out of your car, time it, see how that lasts. Give it to a friend and ask them, hey, was this too soon? Was this too late? You're never going to get it perfect for everybody, but again, if you're firing it off immediately, it's probably too soon. So just get a rough estimate of what that is. Maybe I'm walking in the house, I have to turn around, so that's okay. But we want to fire off a local notification. Now, in order to do this, we actually have to ask permissions of the user to do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some space at the end of the line of code here, give us enough room, and then I'm going to copy in our permissions function. Now this actually came from an application that I built out, so it's going to be a little bit robust. So let's go through it. I'm going to hit Command-Shift-Y to get rid of that debug there. It's going to give me a couple of errors because I have to import a library, but we'll handle that in a second. Okay, so I've just created this function called request permission. Actually, it should not be called remote notifications. Let's just call it request permission notifications. Now we're going to get a reference to the main application, and the way that we do that is UI application. It's a class function, so we don't need to instantiate it, and we call .shared on it, and that'll give us a reference back to the application itself. This is a single tin. There's only one application, namely our application that we're running now. So we want to get a reference to it because we're going to actually ask the application to then go ask the operating system if we can have permissions for those notifications. All right, so if you have ever seen this code online, maybe from an article. They probably don't include all of this robustness, but let's talk about this really quickly because it's kind of important when dealing with iOS versions before 10. Before iOS 10 came out, it was really easy to ask for permissions. Namely, what this line of code does is it says if it's iOS 10 and above, then do all the code that's below it. Else, we go all the way else, just do this. So again, it was a lot easier to do it back in the day, but it wasn't as robust. So as you can see, there's 2 lines of code here that kind of wrap, but we're asking for the alert the alert to make an alert. We're asking for the ability to do a badge, and then we're also asking for the ability to play a particular sound. You can have custom sounds as part of your notifications. You just have to have that as part of your application bundled in, or use one of Apple's default sound. All right, so that's as easy as it was back in the day. Now with iOS 10 and above, we have to do a little bit more, not too much, but it does use a different library called UN User Notification Center. Again, that is a singleton object, so we're just going to get the current implementation or the instantiation of that. And in this case, we're going to set the delegate to ourselves. So what happens when we receive a notification or we're asking for notifications? We want to get called back on this particular this function, or excuse me, this class, this viewController.swift class. All right, so the error I'm getting here is an unresolved identifier. And anytime you see unresolved identifier, it's either one, you spelled it incorrectly, or probably more often than not, you haven't imported that library. So we're going to import that right now. I'm just going to type in notification, and the one I want is the user notifications here. So I'm going to select that one, give it a little bit more space there, and that error should go away after a second. Well, actually, all the other errors went away. So we have a different error. Excuse me. We have a different error now. This one is cannot assign a value of viewController, which is what the parent class is of this particular class that we're in. It cannot assign it to a type UN User Notification Center delegate. Okay, what does that mean? It just means that we're not telling iOS that we're implementing certain features of the User Notification Center delegate. What does that mean? Well, let's scroll up to the top. I'll show you how to fix that error. I'm going to put a comma in after our CL Location Manager delegate, meaning we want to be a delegate of the location manager, but we also want to be a delegate of the notification. So I'm just going to type in notification delegate, and you can see that I'm not perfect in how I spelled the class, but iOS or Xcode figured out that I wanted the UN User Notification Center delegate. So that's the one I want. Perfect. I'm going to save that and then scroll down, and after the compiler reindexes the code, it goes away. All right, so now we can continue our explanation of the code. So we have this auth options, and now you can kind of recognize this from the code below. We're going to ask for the ability to show an alert, show a badge, and to show a sound. User Notification Center.current is we're going to on this center. So it's one object. We're going to say, hey, Notification Center, User Notification Center. I'm asking for authorization, and I'm going to pass in those items that we're requesting permission for. Auth options, that's the name of this variable. And then it's going to be asynchronous, which means line 69 will execute, and then the next line of code that'll execute is basically nothing. It'll pop out of this, it'll go to the next line, which is the end curly brace, which is the end statement for the if block. Obviously, it skips over the else and then exits the function that we have for this particular function. Now, I'm going to call this function so it actually gets executed in the view did load. So I'm going to just put this at the bottom here. Maybe I'll put it as the first item so that it comes up immediately. Request permission notifications. Okay, so that'll execute that function. All right, so as I mentioned, the next line of code that gets executed after this line, which is now 72, is nothing, it'll pop out of the function. Sometime in the future, it'll come back, hence the name asynchronously. This may happen on a different thread, but it'll happen kind of as our application is going off and doing its thing. So do not rely on the fact that you have permissions once you call this line of code. Inside of this function, once it's ready to pop up that message, then all of this code underneath gets called. And so the first thing that we want to look at is out the error. This error could happen for a number of reasons, but if the user accepts or denies it, it won't produce an error, and it'll fall into this else clause, and then it'll jump into this if clause and says, is it authorized? If it's authorized, just print out to the console that indeed we're authorized. And then what I'm doing is I'm posting a notification. This is a inter-app notification, so this will let the rest of my code know, if you're curious, that it is now authorized. Now look, notifications are authorized. And maybe a different part of your application cares about that. And if it does, it can listen to this notification. This is just a really nice way of decoupling your application so that you don't have to know about every piece of code that cares about the fact that your app is now authorized to receive notifications. If you want to know more information about this, I do have a video on the notification center. This is not the user notification center, this is the notification center that communicates within your application. All right, so if you're authorized, great. If not, then it's going to actually go through this whole set of, it's going to pop up this alert and say, hey, you're not authorized. Would you like to be authorized? It'll take you to the settings URL. So if you tap on this alert that pops up, I am showing the alert down here in a dispatch queue, again in any synchronous call. I'm going to present this alert because, again, this inner code here, all of this code actually, as I mentioned, is asynchronous. So I don't know if it's on the main thread. I don't know if it's in a background thread. It's just being executed sometime in the future, maybe as the app is doing other things. And so when I present this alert saying, hey, you're not authorized, do you want to enable notifications? Then I want to make sure that that's done on the main thread. So again, this is for a real application that I did write. So it's going to be a little bit more robust than probably examples that you've seen on the internet, but hopefully this is useful to see this kind of thing. Now again, the alert has two actions. It's to turn on, this is specifically for push notifications, even though they kind of work the same. You want to turn on notifications. So turn on notifications. And again, if you do want to turn on notifications or you want to say no thanks, that's your prerogative. You give the user the ability to do that, but if they do want to turn on notifications, bring them to the part in the settings that enables them to do that. And the way that we do that is we get a URL. I'm going to call this settings URL, and I'm going to create a URL based on the constant UI application open settings URL string. Honestly, I don't actually know what this looks like, though you could probably dive into the declaration and see what the value of this, but I don't care because this is going to be unique to my application. And so when I set this as a URL, I can also open that URL. So again, if you're selecting this button, I'm going to go ahead and ensure that this URL is working, and if not, just return out something's broken. So that's what that guard function does. But if everything's working fine, we say, hey, first of all, can I open this URL? It's always a good idea to do some error checking on this. And if so, if I can open the URL, then go ahead and open it. Okay, so when I open it based on this UI application share.open, it'll put the application in the background and open up the settings URL. That will produce, that'll give you a little checkbox to enable or disable push notifications. So they'll be disabled, you bring the user directly to that screen, and voila, they can turn on push notifications. Okay, so all of this, as I said, it's a little bit overly robust, but again, it's real world code. And so if you guys like this kind of thing, I know it's a little wordy and it's a little long and involved, but if you do like this thing to see how this is actually used, let me know either in the chat, or if you're watching this recorded, then put it in the comments for this video, and I'll make sure that I include more real-life code in the future. All right, so all that code is just to ask permissions to display something on the screen. We haven't actually displayed anything on the screen, so let's go ahead and get the code for that. So I have a next set of code here that's going to actually do the heavy lifting for posting that notification. So let's create a couple lines of code here. All right, let's go through this really quickly. So again, when we are entering or exiting a geofence region, we want to post a notification to the user. So post local notifications is what I call this function. And I want to pass in a string of some sort so I can post a custom message. So whether you entered the region or you exited the region, we'll get that from this. All right, next line of code, center. User notification center.current. Again, we're just getting an instance of that, so we don't have to keep calling this function. As a side note, if you're calling functions over and over and over and over again, there's a little bit of overhead as the application has to swap out whatever function you're currently in with the memory of the function that you're calling, and then we'll return back. And so with computers today and iPhones and iPads today, this is really, really fast. But again, if you're doing it a million times, it's really a best practice to not have to call this function every time you want to do something with the center. So for example, we're going to add this notification to the center down here. Well, if I was doing this many, many times and I was calling this function, again, it has to switch context, it has to do this, return, and there's a little bit of overhead on that. In this case, probably overkill, but just to show you why I do that explicitly. All right, the next body of code that we have is the content of the notification. So the content of the notification is going to have a title, which is what we pass in as a string here. So event title, so you entered or you exited. And then the body, again, you'd probably want to make this dynamic, but I'm just going to show you what the body looks like by typing in this hard-coded text here. You've entered a new region. And then the sound, you can play just the default iOS sound, or you can play any sound that maybe is unique to your brand. I worked on an application one time where the push notification that came in on their TV commercials, they had the sound of a violin or a fiddle playing, and so they wanted to use that exact sound when you got a push notification from their application. So you can choose to brand your push notification, which is a really good idea. Plus, when users hear that, they know that it's a push notification from your particular app. Whether that's good or bad, hopefully it's a good thing, but hopefully you don't make them dread hearing that sound. Otherwise, they'll turn off push notifications. All right, so we have the body and what we're showing in that notification, that local notification. When do we want it to get fired off? And there's a bunch of different triggers that we can do. Now let's call another trigger here, and I'm just going to type in trigger. And you have 3 different triggers that this will accept. We have a calendar notification trigger, that's this one. And what that does is that allows us to select either a day of the week or a time of day of a particular day of the week or a month or whatever. So this is really great if you're having your users say on February 19th at 6:30 p.m. remind me of whatever, right? So you can do this calendar notification. What we're going to do today is just a time interval notification. So we're just going to have this fire off after a couple seconds. And then the last one is UN location notification trigger. And if you can read the description below here, it's a trigger that causes a notification to be delivered when the user's device enters or exits the specified geographic region. Well, that's funny because that's exactly what we're doing here. So you could actually rewrite this entire application with fewer lines of code just using that particular trigger, and would ask you for a particular geographic region or geofence like we've declared above in this application. But what's the fun in doing things the easy way? We're going to do, just in case you want to be a little bit more robust, or maybe you don't want to trigger it as part of a geofence, or again, maybe you want a little bit more control over it. So I've already declared that in the next line, minutes, every 5 minutes. It depends on what your application's doing, right? So it's like, take out the trash. You want that repeat every minute, every 2 minutes. Take out the trash, until the user takes action. And when they take action by either clicking on the notification or actually going into the app and marking that object as complete, you may want this to repeat. Now the minimum, if you repeat it, if I change this to true, the minimum interval that you can remind or post notifications to their phone is 60 seconds. So it makes it a little less annoying than, let's say, every second. All right, so once we have what we want to show and when we want to show it, we can go ahead and combine those objects and create another object so that we can pass it to the notification center. So I'm gonna actually request that the operating system or the application post this notification for me. So this is going to be a notification request. It is of type notification request. We call the constructor notification request, and we give it an identifier. Now, again, this could be anything. The identifier is actually kind of important if you want to cancel this. So again, if I'm repeating every 60 seconds, but I have no way of canceling that, well, that's going to be super crazy and obnoxious. So if you give it an identifier, you can then go ahead and cancel that notification later. You can get the notification center, get the current location, and then you can either cancel all of them, remove all pending notification requests, that sort of thing. Let's type in all here. So remove all pending notifications. You can remove all delivered ones. So even if you've delivered it and it's sitting in their queue, you can still remove it. Now, these are going to be, well, deprecated, but you can go ahead and remove those, either by identifier or, again, removing all pending notifications. All right, and then finally, once we've created that, we've passed it the context, the content, and the trigger, we say, hey, center, we're going to add this notification request, and when we're done with that, just make sure that we haven't produced an error, and if we have not, I'm just going to type, or I'm going to print out added to the screen here. All right, so that's pretty much all we need to do. Let me go ahead and make sure I have everything up here, user notifications. Okay, I'm going to compile this. Okay, so our application is now running. What I haven't done, though, is actually post the notification here. So I was trying to remember what to do, and that was what I was supposed to do. So request permission notification when the location manager says that I've entered the region. So it's going to accept a string here. I'm going to type in a string. It's going to give me an error, but I'll handle that in a second. I'm going to say entered, and then whatever the region is. Actually, let me just copy and paste this in here, be a little bit quicker and less error prone. Okay, so again, the entered region, that's going to be the title of the local notification. I did not have the name of the parameter. So the name of the parameter was event. Okay, so hopefully you can see what that does. Let's rerun this application. Oh, what happened here? So argument. Oh, request. Okay, sorry, that was the wrong function. So I want to post the notification. Wrong function. Copied and pasted the wrong thing. Okay, now that fixed it. Sometimes I make mistakes. But certainly, guys, if you want to catch the next live stream, if you weren't able to catch this one, then again, make sure you catch the next one. You can ask questions if something's confusing, if I'm going too fast for you. Jump on there and let me know. Okay, so this one did not ask me for the notifications because I've already done it. So if I go ahead and delete the application, while you're debugging this, you can do this. You can test out your permissions code here. So I'm going to run this real quick. It's going to ask me the original from the last video whether I want to allow access to it. Now for remote notifications local notifications of this type that I want monitoring for GPS and geofencing, I actually need to always allow. Now if the user is going to have only while using the app, well obviously they're going to be required to have the app open or running for them to get these notifications on the geofence. So it's very important that you have the user always allow, and if they do select only while using app, maybe you can alert them that, hey, if you're only using the app, then maybe we'll have to turn off geofencing for you. So okay, so I'm going to say always allow, and then the location, which is the name of the app, would like to send you notifications. So allow or don't allow. I'm going to allow this. And we can see our authorized being printed out of the screen, which is what we have here. So it fell within this if clause. All right, so one thing that I'm not going to cover in this stream is handling notifications while the application is open. You can do this very simply by popping up a UI alert and saying, hey, you've done this thing, whatever. But the real magic is while the app is closed. So I'm going to hit Command-Shift-H to put the application in the background. You can lock the screen if you want to. It's kind of the same effect. But I am going to change the device's location. So location, custom location. We're outside of the geofence. We're going to put it inside of the geofence. And again, we should see a notification after 1 second is what the trigger is supposed to be. If I go back down to the code. So after 1 second, it should happen right away. There it is. That's the default sound, entered Boise. You can look at it by pulling down on it. If you tap into it, it'll open up the application. Okay, so there's that one. Now I'm going to exit the geofence. So put some other number here. Doesn't matter as long as it's within or outside of that 100-meter radius. Hit OK. And there you go. So exited. You've entered a new region. So whatever region is outside, you can handle this. And again, you'd want to set up different regions for the user's home, or again, whatever your application is trying to deal with. You can have them add that manually or automatically, depending upon, again, what your application does. But for instance, the user can say, here, add my home, maybe pull up a map and they can add their home, or you can do it via address, etc. So hopefully this was useful for you guys. If you weren't able to catch this live stream, again, they'll be every Tuesday and Thursdays. I will probably take off a couple days here and there randomly, but all of the events will be published to the channel so you can know ahead of time when the events are going to happen, and then also what we're covering in those events. If you want to, if you're having an application that you're working on and you want me to cover a particular topic, let me know. Otherwise, we got plenty of topics to cover that I'll just keep going. But again, hopefully this was useful to you. Hopefully this format is a little bit better than the shorter videos where you can ask questions and whatnot. But we'll see you next Thursday with another iOS video, and also Thursday before this live stream, we're doing an Android. So busy, busy, busy. If you guys like it, make sure you let me know. Otherwise, I'll probably just do this for a month or two and then stop. But if you really, really want to see more of these, let me know, because how can I know if they're useful to you unless you let me know? So thanks, and we'll see you on Thursday.